Okay, and we are recording, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Again, you guys, that was Anna Mack, and she is the USHPA membership manager. So awesome, and we really appreciate her support, along with the support of the entire staff at the USHPA, especially all the folks that are sort of making this happen. Today, we want to chat about a few things. First, we're going to give a little overview about the USHPA Accident Committee. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what happened in 2022. We'll talk a little bit about how to get ahead of the overall, known pitfalls and risks that tend to present in the springtime. And then we will leave you with some parting shots. So during that time, if you would like to chime in with any questions, then feel free. And if by chance we don't get a chance to get back to you and answer your question during the webinar, then please know that we're going to collect the questions and we'll try to respond to you via email or some other method later on. So with that being said, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Oh, I just came, by the way, from the point of the mountain, and it's a beautiful day. And I thought maybe, just maybe, I would show you real quick the view this afternoon, just a few minutes ago before I ran down here. Clearly the clouds are popping, the wind is blowing. It's only good for mini wings at the moment. This is Earl from Alaska, and then Zia from Chicago, just trying their luck on crosshand kiting, and it's the season. So a little color and a little clouds there for you to get started. Perfect. Here's your overview of the USHPA Accident Committee. Number one, the USHPA Accident Committee is largely led by volunteers like myself. And I handle the paragliding side, and then there's generally someone who handles the hang gliding side. It turns out on the hang gliding side, we don't have a volunteer at the moment. So if anybody is interested, then feel free to contact us and we could definitely use the help. Finally, we also have Martin Palmas and then Tim Hurd, the legal counsel for the USHPA. And these are the people that are generally on the committee and that comprise the committee. It is true that we are looking for volunteers, even on the paragliding side. We need people to help with any number of things. So if, as the webinar continues here, you have that feeling that you might like to be a part of what we're doing, if you'd like to help, then by all means, feel free. This is just a little educational moment about how the USHPA Accident Committee works. And the biggest reason why we want to share this is so that if you are kind enough to file an accident report and then you receive a call from us, or you wonder how it is that we chase down the information or what we do with it, well then, you'll have an idea. So the first thing is that you go to Google and punch in USHPA accident report, and it pops up quite quickly. And that's a good thing. And by the time you arrive there, you'll notice that you're encouraged to put in any number of details about the incident or accident that you're reporting, including the date, location, phase of flight, etc. And when that happens, then a notification will go out, and it'll go out and notify, for example, if it's a towing accident, it would notify some people on the towing committee so that they're just aware. Accident committee naturally gets notified, but also club officers in your area will get notified. So it does a good thing in that it helps us to harvest good statistical data to be able to identify trends, but it also alerts people who might be concerned. So the next thing that might happen is you might be led to fill out any number of other reports. There's one that's filed if there's some damage to property. And so that alerts the legal side that there might be something of considerable interest. And then you also notice that there is an AIRS, A-I-R-S element to it. I got a report today that maybe it's not quite working, but just so you can put that in perspective, what that is, that's an interface that's designed to, number one, ensure anonymity for people filing and contributing data about the incidents and accidents. And then it's used for one very specific purpose, and that's just for certain people who have passed a bit of training about sensitive information and privacy, can go in and look at what's been filed. The reason why I'm mentioning it is because one thing we can't do with the information that's given to heirs is we can't talk about it as accident committee. So this is why I've highlighted the word calls here. What will happen is that you will get a call from somebody on the accident committee. That will be likely me, and on the paragliding side, and then whoever's the volunteer on the hang gliding side, and that's where we'll get the skinny on what exactly happened and what category of incident/accident it was, and then there'll be a little discussion, and naturally we'll go ahead and use that information for the following purposes. One is to identify trends. Another is to write articles occasionally. We do have the power to send out an alert email from the accident committee. We've done so in the past if we see an alarming trend. Webinars like this one. Sometimes we see fit to have direct contact with instructors if we see a trend in an area. Sometimes there are articles in the magazine. There'll be one in the next one. There have been short accident summaries, which is something we'd like to see more of. Again, if you are interested in volunteering, that's an area where we could use help. Again, we highlight the accident trends. Mostly, we want to do forward-thinking things like ID risk areas, and then suggest forward-thinking ways of mitigating that risk. Finally, we do a fatality summary for the website, and that is about it for the moment. So that's how your accident committee works. In case I didn't mention it, we do have a monthly call where the accident committee chats about each one of the things that happen. And for just your overall understanding, one thing to know is that because we are in the United States of America and because of the legal environment that we live in, it's most appropriate for us to only talk about our knowledge of the incidents and accidents over the phone or over a Zoom. So we don't make it a habit of having a written record with details about things that happen, and that's to protect everyone involved, the reporter, the person that the accident happened to, ourselves, et cetera. It's just the nature of the beast, and that's why you will notice that this accident committee workflow is just the tiniest bit clunky. There are a number of factors that sort of bear down on us, and we do our very best to try to manage all of that. So 2022 trends. Anna, do we have anybody who chimed in with a question about anything about that?
Yep, I was just about to unmute. Okay. So a couple of questions. Is there any possibility to connect InReach or similar devices to the accident report? And similar question, how in real time do we generate accident/incident reporting?
Okay, so we'll answer the second question first. We'll keep in mind that we do have some other people on the host side, so if anybody sees fit to chime in, feel free. But the short answer is you file an accident report by going to, and I have the link right here, www.ushpa.org/page/incident. So that'll show up pretty easy in your Google search, and then that's easily found on the USHPA website. So that's how you file. And then as far as the suggestion that we might use InReach information, data, et cetera, to maybe, I don't know, highlight a location. I think there's any number of ways that InReach data could be used. Sometimes there's data from any number of instruments that can be factored in. We certainly welcome all that, and feel free to follow up offline if you have some good ideas. Anything else for us, Anna?
So let's see. It seems that reporting accidents and incidents is like getting the plague at areas in the US I have flown, including local hills. Why do you think that is, and how can we change it?
What was the first part of that question? I'm sorry.
It seems that reporting accidents and incidents is like getting the plague at the areas in the US that I have flown.
Got it. So
how can we change it?
perfect. So it is true that certain regions and certain flying cultures have a better culture of accident reporting than others. And so an example would be, in the eastern part of the US, Northeast. They are absolutely fantastic about filing incident/accident report about any number of blown launches, landings in the bush, things that aren't terribly remarkable. And we're very grateful for the fact that they do that, because they push our data collecting toward the level of being increasingly accurate. And so we do have some areas where it really is prevalent, and maybe one or two instructors or club people will just make it their job to file an incident accident report on anything that they hear of. And this is the main message that we'd like to carry to everyone, which is just, it doesn't matter if 4 or 5 people file an accident report on the same incident. It's fine. We can weed through that, no problem. The sad thing is when a thing happens and then we don't get a report on it, then any number of things happen like that. The data is not good. We miss out on the opportunity to learn. And then quite frankly, from the volunteer standpoint, if people are filing incident accident reports, then we have stuff to work with. Our job becomes very meaningful. If all we get is a small portion of the things that happen, and we have to go fight to find out information and chase them down, well, then our work becomes less meaningful and we are less of benefit to the flying public. How did we do? Excuse me, Anna, how did we do on that one?
We are good. And then there's just one more that came in this kind of realm of topics, and then we can move on. Has there been any significant breach in confidentiality of phone conversations with USHPA by legal, subpoena, or similar? It seems that legal advisement regarding how to discuss accident details without potential for subpoenas testimony, such as is drone on risk management committees for hospitals.
Gotcha. So in the time that I've been involved, and I've been on committees for, since the early 2000s, I'm not aware of any incidents of that. That person spoke specifically to email conversations phone conversations. And it's been my experience that no one's ever gone down and chased any summary from a legal conversation. And so it's been our experience and our understanding that as long as we communicate everything that we communicate via telephone, and there's no written record of it, then it's impossible for us to do a disservice to any member, reporter, or a person who suffers an accident. And we are very sort of proud of how we've handled ourselves in that regard. We're very proud of the system that we have, and we really believe in the system that we have. We know that it has some downsides, and that it makes it harder to communicate. We can't, for example, send a summary of the data that we have around. It never would ever be emailed. It's never ever in print. It's just held extremely privately among the people on the committee. And all we're able to do with it ever is to summarize. So it's always the case that the names and the details are extracted. Very good. Any others for us, Anna, or should we move on?
I think we can go ahead and move on.
Perfect. Love it. All righty. So it is true that I am just your volunteer paragliding accident committee co-chair, but I am also an instructor. So you will notice that we're not trying to substitute for your instructor. The very first thing that we want to say about any of this is that your instructor should be your absolute go-to. We'd also suggest to any and all members that they be open-minded and that they have many several instructors as the years go by, and that they continually update with their instructors because things do change. Having said that, when we communicate with people, we do have this opportunity to help them seek clarity on certain subjects. So that is the job of a person like myself, is to to talk about the things that have happened with these people, to ask them what there is to learn about each one of the incidents or accidents, and then to help them to seek clarity. And if they're missing an opportunity to learn from their event, well, then we do see fit to chime in. And then also when we have opportunities like this, we have to cross up the line into the side of doing a tiny bit of instruction. So apologies in advance for that. It's just sort of the nature of the job at the moment. 2022, when we go and make the calls, we notice a lot of trouble with people who end up launching with a riser twist or a wrong way twist sort of problem. And so, forgive me, I'm gonna make a few notes here. The problem is that people have a favored turn direction when they go to do a reverse inflation and subsequent takeoff. And most people are slave to one side, like they always turn right. And we support that. Things happen. For example, if a person goes down the hill and then they abort their launch and they turn to the left as they set the glider down, then they bring it back up, then they're set up to turn a way that they're not used to. And that can get people. Historically, that has been a big problem. It also happens that if people get lifted off prematurely and they're not ready to turn, well, then it's very common for pilots to bury one brake, bury both brakes. It's a bit of a problem. So the other, those are basically the biggest problems. And so to answer to those, what we suggest is that a strict pre-flight, above all else. We run a pre-flight that includes looking over your shoulder in the direction of your turn 3 times during the pre-flight process. And it's been our experience that when you do 3 starts to turn forward in the favored direction, then the statistical likelihood that you'll turn the wrong way goes way, way down. So when you go to check to see that the coast is clear, that nobody's coming, you never look over the opposite side. You only turn and look in the favored direction, in the direction of turn. The other thing that we suggest is that there are some schools in the world where they encourage people to learn how to turn both ways. And it is true that people who learn how to turn both ways and who also have a very strict pre-flight are less freaked out when they find a situation where they're turning the wrong way. They started to turn the wrong way, their pre-flight went wrong. They're less surprised and they're better at troubleshooting. So the one thing we suggest is an open mind about turning both directions. This can be advantageous if you're launching on a side hill where it's cross. But again, I would say check with your instructor about this subject and work a progression on learning how to turn both ways or a different direction. Finally, if you launch prematurely, then steer the glider straight. So when the glider's steered straight away from the hill, then the pilot has a moment to figure out what's gone wrong, untwist the correct direction, and then off they go. So finally, this is a dynamic that we only ran across in the last couple of years, but if you are turning right, then a little drift to the right, a glider that's off to the right is no problem. In fact, it makes it easier to turn face forward. But if you have a big drift to the left when you're turning right, you may notice that it's almost impossible to turn and face forward. And this is where a lot of the crashes happen. So the suggestion is you just bias your inflation so that if you're turning to the right, the glider comes up and is trending a little bit toward the right. We went a little bit long on that one, but I think at the very least, it's food for thought. If anybody has any questions about that dynamic, then I'm willing to entertain. The second one is, and this one is like on the level of pandemic, this misguided 360s especially at small hills. So the simple act of throwing a 360 at an altitude and at a position away from the hill where there's just not enough room to make an actual 360. We get this in the full-size wing context, people trying to thermal. We get this especially in the mini wing / speed wing context. In that realm, it's referred to as barrel roll, but it's kind of the same phenomenon. It's throwing a 360 at a place where it's not appropriate. A lot of times when it's a mini wing or a speed wing, these are people who haven't done this type of maneuver. They haven't done a barrel roll or a 360 with their mini wing ever. And so they haven't the experience and they just don't know. It can turn too fast and surprise them, or it can turn too slow and surprise them. And we have a problem with that, at least at our site, like on a monthly basis. So we're really doing our best to try to get ahead of that one. I will say one thing from having been on a lot of those accidents personally, the people know exactly what they did wrong. There's zero question, right? And most of the time they're in absolute disbelief. So the comment is, I can't believe I decided to throw a 360 there. To that end, when we teach about this phenomenon in our school, we refer to it as a very big life choice. The decision to 360 is a life choice. And should be considered strongly, and the decision to 360 should pass the first test, which is, yeah, it seems like a good idea to 360, but it should also pass the second test, which is, it still seems like a good idea to 360, and the person should just sort of leave themselves an out, and if there's any question, then don't 360. So this one's a tiny bit emotional, but just because we have so many of these happen all over the country, and we can't seem to get ahead of it. And maybe this is a good time to see if there's any questions in the Q&A about these topics right here.
Yep, just one. It just says, is there any trend regarding toe takeoff?
We don't actually have a trend toward a high number of toe takeoff accidents / incidents at this moment. And we would have, it's unclear if that would be because they're not being reported or because we just don't know about them. Very good. So in the previous year and then fading into 2022, we do have quite a few accident reports that stem from top landings. And so usually it will be something along the lines of a forced top landing, meaning a top landing that's done in conditions that aren't perfect for it. So we have a little bit of advice moving forward on this subject. We advocate for multiple practice approaches. If it's good enough to top land, then a lot of times it's good enough to do a couple flybys and just prove that it's okay. And generally speaking, we are trying to discourage top landing at a site that's not familiar. Finally, we're advocating for only top landing at sites that are known to be good for top landing. So we have a high incidence of, I knew I shouldn't have forced that top landing. It wasn't quite right. I didn't do any practice approaches to make sure it was cool. People don't normally top land that site, or I shouldn't have used a creative approach. So use a very systematic approach, maybe systematic approach, known site, check with the locals. If the locals advocate for top landing there and they support it, well, then that's a good thing, and that's support for the top landing. If you're a student type, then radio guidance on the first few top landings, if that's how it goes. And then it's also true that there's always a favored direction. It's not the case that you could come and top land from either side of the takeoff. There's always a side of the takeoff that's favorable in terms of wind. We do have a bit of an incidence of people who were using flapping as a technique to try to lose altitude for the top landing. We would generally avoid flapping as a technique to lose altitude during a top landing. Throw in a quick wild card tip here. Well, we'll stop shy of typing it out, but the trick, if ever flapping were to be used, is to let off systematically and let the glider remain in its clean configuration. In other words, give the glider sort of a chance to breathe. It's only the type of flapping where people are deep in the brakes and they stay deep in the brakes that ends up with catastrophic results. Less so if the people are smart enough to let off all the way every second. Perfect. The next one is deflations. We can't go a season without having a number of incident accidents that stem from deflation. So when we do our sort of due diligence on these, we find sometimes that people aren't sort of up to speed on the fundamentals surrounding deflation. So specifically, pulling brake prevents deflations. People generally know that that's the case, but they sometimes stop shy of putting it into words like that and making it primary in their sort of understanding of the subject. So we just go ahead and type it out there. There are things that can make it worse. For example, speed bar makes the glider more prone to deflation. So we say only as appropriate, right? So it is true that you can't just push speed bar. You can only push speed bar as far and as hard as the air is smooth. So even if it is windy and you really want to go forward, it doesn't mean you can always use absolute full speed, because sometimes when it's windy, it's also turbulent and it doesn't support it. You open up yourself to the risk of a big deflation. And if you happen to be low, for example, right off takeoff or as you're coming into land, if you use a lot of speed bar and the air doesn't support it, then you have a risk of a big deflation low. So naturally, choosing good conditions. So, and then avoiding rotors. These are the things that you can do to keep yourself from having a deflation accident / injury. So if by chance this logic of pulling brake to prevent deflations doesn't make good sense to you, if you're not up to speed on the speed bar use, then please, get with your instructor. At the very least, you can get with us, but we want our flying population to have clarity on this subject. Now, we almost can't talk about deflations without talking about spin or stall / spin, because that's the kind of other end of the spectrum. Stall spin accidents happen every year, and they're kind of the other end of the spectrum because that's too much brake for too long, right? So even as we type these two things, we see this dichotomy between the glider wanting brake and then not wanting too much brake. So if you ever were in this sport and you thought to yourself, these darn paragliders seem like they want one thing 1 second and a different thing the next, well, then you're correct. Sometimes you need to pull brake, and then quite often right after it, you need to let off. And if you ever thought, it's really easy to over brake it, and it's also kind of easy to under brake it, and paragliders want just the right amount of brake all the time, well then, yes, that's exactly right. So it's paradoxical in that way, and that's just the nature of the beast. If you never heard it in so many words, well then, we're happy to help. Perfect. So yeah, avoid too much brake for too long. And so this happens in large part to people who do not have a light touch, right? So people who have stiff arms and give mechanical inputs. So avoiding stiff arms and mechanical inputs would be the way to avoid stall and spin. And then we're big advocates for weight shift. The more that you weight shift, the less brake you need to pull. So it's almost like weight shift is spin insurance. And we don't really have any problem of people being too athletic in their harness. Meanwhile, we have a reasonable problem of people not being athletic in their harness and pulling too much brake and then causing the glider to spin. So, perfect. At this point, we do have, we're at 6:32. We're doing pretty well on timing. We have a bullet point here for any participants in the Q&A that might like to have a certain topic discussed. So Anna, did any of that show up?
Yep, one did. So perhaps logistics are a reason for bad top landings. That's where a car was parked, didn't want to hike, etc. Ready for discussion?
Perfect. We love that. So whoever commented or asked that question, that's a fantastic point. Convenience and logistics can definitely play in, and everyone knows the situation. They don't want their car left on top of the takeoff, or they want to be the hero and drive the car down. And so I guess the main thing to know about that is that, it's not worth it, and that you can let somebody else be the hero and let somebody who has more experience than you, et cetera, be the person who top lands. And this kind of carries over into other areas as well. Many debriefs were reminded of the lesson that just because it's convenient doesn't mean that it's smart. Manifests on landing as well. You'll have an option to land someplace that's got maybe a little bit of road, or a place that's a little bit more crowded or more typical or more close to the cars, or cleaner. And they're so inviting. And meanwhile, sometimes they're not the safest, smartest place to land. So sometimes the safest place to land is extremely inconvenient. It's on the wrong side of the river. It's a long walk. It's the dirty field versus the clean field. And so, pilots have to make a deal with themselves that when they're faced with that paradigm, that they'll take the inconvenient option that is slightly safer and more predictable, and they'll forego the convenient one. So we, in our ground school, will draw this paradigm. If you're driving on a 2-lane road and you come around the corner and there's 2 cars coming at you, then you've already made a deal with yourself that you're not going to get in a head-on. So everyone knows that you just go 3-lane or drive off the road. But the worst thing that can happen is the head-on. And we just know that it's sort of matter of fact. And we've made that deal with ourselves ahead of time. It's something that we can count on. And so when it comes to paragliding, you have to make certain deals with yourself. And so you have to make a deal with yourself that you're gonna have to leave your car on the takeoff overnight. Or you might have to go hike up a big mountain to get your car. It's part of the deal. You might have to get someone else to give you a ride. You might have to be, late for work. All these things happen. They're sort of part of the deal. And you make those deals with yourself ahead of time, then it's a huge advantage. So, little philosophical chat there for you. Any others for us, Anna?
Yeah, we got a couple more here. How often is the traffic pattern enforced with site restrictions?
So this is a great question, and I would love to say that traffic patterns are always followed and that everyone knows the rules and everybody sticks to them. But it's a little bit far from the reality of how it works. So in actual fact, from the accident data collecting standpoint, it is true that more mid-airs and near mid-airs come from people who are taking a literal interpretation of the rules or trying to be extremely regimented in a traffic pattern than from people who are going a bit, than from anything else. So, more times than not, when we debrief the accident, the story is that somebody was faced with a traffic situation and they were headed toward maybe a smooth pass, but then they realized it was a non-traditional, basically illegal pass, passing on the wrong side, at least from their point of view. And they decided to do an abrupt move to make the pass legal and to follow the pattern. And so, again, I would, I really, really don't want to be the person who's advocating for not following the rules. I think in a perfect world, we would absolutely stick to the rules as rule number one, and we would teach everyone, and we would just improve everyone's pursuit of perfect rule following. But I really think that it's true that happens all the time that there are multiple layers in the patterns, and there are situations that dictate that a non-traditional pass will need to happen. And so I think above all else, pilots need to look ahead, indicate their intention early. They need to communicate, so start yelling early, look out, coming your way, give me some room. It doesn't really matter what you scream in the pattern, but by screaming something, you can break everybody out of the trance and people will start giving room. And I think it's also a good cornerstone to look for the people that are causing trouble in the pattern. If you see somebody who just doesn't get the flow, then you should just go land yourself because it's not safe to fly with that person. And yes, in a perfect world, we definitely follow the pattern. And any pilot who's been around will tell you that they do. And it's just that when push comes to shove, we need to look toward open space. I look at our specific situation and do what's clever for that moment. Sorry if we digress a tiny bit on that one. I think it was a good learning opportunity. For sure, even in our tests, we make reference to this notion that a pilot has to see and avoid, that the main thing to do is to not hit anybody. And furthermore, it is said in the business that if ever there was a midair, it would be shared responsibility between both pilots. Finally, a superior pilot will navigate in such a way that they don't have any close calls. So what else do we have, Anna?
All right, so next one, influence of spectators, their expectations on one's judgment, question mark?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have a big incidence of people telling us that if they did what they did or they had the problem that they had because of their GoPro or because somebody was taking a picture. But we do know this to be very real, and we know a lot of people this is probably the bigger, more important lesson. People are calibrating on what's cool, what's appropriate, and how to fly based on other people's video. So, historical perspective kind of helps. In the old days, we would call each other on the phone and describe how we were using certain techniques and what we were doing. Some people would fly in a straight line because they were out flying on their own. They didn't even know that they could turn off the wind. A lot of simple flying happened in previous decades, and everyone was really happy to take the simple flights. And it wasn't until the advent of big communication, social media, GoPros, et cetera, that people realized the variety of what's possible. For sure, there's lots of learning that can be done from all of that, but it can also take a person who's not sort of ready for the risk, and it can make them think that they should be flying in a certain way and taking certain risks that aren't actually appropriate for them, and it kind of can throw off their inner barometer for what's cool and what's appropriate for them. So I think we took that question a little different direction than that person was steering us, but I do think it's a valuable point. We try to encourage people to enjoy the minimum type of flying that will keep them in the sport. The simplest type of flying that would make the sport interesting. I make the joke all the time, if the FAA came along and said you can't fly over 10 feet, I would still be in the sport. I would still be happy. That would work for me. And we're just trying to see if maybe, just maybe, we can steer the community and the movement that direction. Very good. Any others?
I do have a couple more. Do you want to go forward? We can come back to any outstanding questions towards the end, or do you
How
want
about one more? Where we seem to be moving through them quite fast.
Okay. I've got two here, so I'll go with this one first. Interested in knowing the spectrum of accidents that happen at different sites. Example, mountain versus teaching versus coastal, etc.
Okay, so I'm not going to be able to answer to that one, but I will say that the more incident reports that are filed, the more volunteer help that we have, the better that our secondary reporting system, I refer to it as AIRS, but it's going to evolve into something else quite soon. The better that that gets, the more we'll have access to that data. What's the next question?
And then a couple more just came in too. So do conflicts, this one's not necessarily on trends, but just related to accident reporting. So do conflicts with landowners because of emergency landing and trespassing count as accidents or incidents?
I don't believe we have a history of logging those as accidents/incidents. I do think that there are committees concerned with that sort of thing, site preservation, et cetera. And there are people involved on the USHPA volunteer side that are very interested to know about those situations and very interested to help, and then also very interested to offer their experience, because dealing with landowners is a very special thing.
Is there a trend of more or less accidents during midday conditions rather than morning, evening, less active conditions?
Well, you know, there are risks that you can anticipate, and there are sometimes risks that you can't. That's a good distinction to make. When you fly in midday conditions, then you know that you're signing up for more risk. And so that's a tricky thing to calibrate on. One of the big variables is where you are in the world. So in the American West, what we find out, and this is a good point of information, there is no place that's as gnarly as the American West. No place has more jet stream wind. No place is higher. No place has more high desert. And no place has basically stronger conditions and a worse thermal to lift ratio than the Western US. So if you're going up in a thermal in the Western US and it's something like midday, it's probably trying to deflate you, and you better have really good skills. On the other hand, if you happen to live in a maritime climate, if you happen to live someplace that's really green, lush, the closer you go to the equator, the further you go north, even towards Canada, for sure toward Alaska, you get a much better thermal to turbulence ratio. So, you know, there are many things that influence the statistical occurrence of deflation accidents and pop and drop sort of accidents in the landing field, et cetera. And it's good to calibrate on all of them. Perfect. We should probably move on. We're at 45 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say we have questions still trickling in, but we can also answer those and send those out along with the recording afterwards if we want to move on, because you still have a couple slides.
Perfect. So anybody who has questions that they would love to hear discussed, you know, feel free to contact me directly. We have ongoing discussion like this all the time, and we really want to help you to find clarity on these subjects. And we want you to find the perspective it's not easy to find as a new paraglider pilot. It's not easy to know what you know and what you don't know. It's not easy to calibrate on conditions and know what's cool and what's not cool. And we want to help. Very good. So ways to get ahead of the risk. Well, you know, engage in ongoing conversation like this. Hopefully in your community, there's discussion about risk and how to avoid it. There's discussion about what the variables are. There's discussion about the lesser known subjects. And so that's number one, but then there's work you can do. And so some of the work that you can do is to get a chance to do a practice reserve extraction. What we know about that process is that it makes it way more likely for you to use your reserve and use it successfully, having pulled it out in the previous months. Also, you get a chance to check to make sure that you have a good reserve, that you know what size it is, that it's big enough, that it's current enough, that it's packed in there in a way that it'll come out in a staged way. There's a lot of advantages to getting a repack, and it's not just reflake the fabric and give the fabric a chance to air out. In fact, that's probably one of the less interesting aspects of it. It's really much more about the process. Perfect. Glider trim tuning starts to be a thing. That's just where you check the length of the lines with a laser down to a couple centimeter tolerance. We used to have 4 riser type gliders. Now it's almost all 3 riser with a lot of 2 riser coming. That means there are fewer lines down low, affecting more glider up high. So it is true that a glider trim has more of a influence on safety these days than it used to. Furthermore, that technology and that service is available. Largely what you're checking for is to make sure that your glider is not too slow. That's what gliders generally do. That is a generalization, but they generally get a little bit slower over time, and a glider that's slow won't come above head, so it makes you look bad, and it can even be a cause of launch accidents. You can turn and face forward and go to run down the hill, and the glider will fall back, and depending on the launch where you live, that could be damming or not damming. And then deep stall incidents can be a problem, and the problem with deep stall incidents is that they sometimes lead to a spin, stall, sort of surge. They can be very complicated, and so you don't want your glider to be prone to deep stall. That's also +1 for not flying with a glider that's full of snow, full of sand, or a glider that's wet. So especially flying in the rain for people flying, B gliders, C gliders, D gliders, they really, really, really don't like being wet. Perfect. So that's glider trim tuning. That's something that you can chase down and get ahead of. Knock on wood, we have not had water landing problems in the last couple of years, but we really, really want everyone to know how evil it is to land a paraglider, especially in a moving river or in surf. It's really, really dangerous. It's almost an immediate disaster. And landing in not moving water is almost as bad. So it's just really to be avoided. If you never had education on this subject during your training, chase us down and we'll give you the full earful on it. But we're just so happy that we don't have any stories in the last couple of years, at least that I'm aware of. And if you happen to fly next to a river, or if you fly next to the ocean, please just spend $50 on a jerk to inflate, life jacket, vest, or even better, one that goes around your neck that's jerk to inflate, and just spend the money and get ahead of it. And heaven forbid you ever do end up in the water, you'll have that resource, and it can save you. Moving right along, tree landing. We give a lot of reports of tree landing in a given year, and almost all of them, and there's no guarantees here, but almost all of them are happy endings. So there is a subject that's out there, and it's the subject of ditching. It's the idea that when things go bad, that the way that you handle yourself when a gust front unleashes, or when you have no good landing options, or when you're deflating or you're under reserve, then in all those cases, you're ditching, meaning you're not having a perfect landing exactly where you want to be. You're just trying to make the best of it. And so it is true that if you land in the trees, depending on the trees and depending on your good luck, I'm not saying there's any guarantees here, but most tree landing stories end well. I'm not saying that they're not inconvenient. For sure, you may pay for a tree rescue. For sure, you might have search and rescue coming to get you out. For sure, you might be up there for hours. That's all true, but those are so much better than even a sprained ankle. Believe me, everybody in search and rescue and everybody in your community would much rather have you nicely hanging in a tree than fighting your way down to an open field in bad weather, or while you're having a bad thing unfold, and just even a sprained ankle. So ditch and ditch well, and tree landing is not the absolute end of the world. And in many cases, if you're going to end up in a tree, you might as well have your reserve out as well. So weather, we're going to talk about, well, generally speaking, put a study on the weather. Remember that in the springtime here, you're going to have big dramatic clouds. You're going to have windier than normal days. You're going to have overdevelopment in the clouds. If you're in the American West, for sure, you're going to have gust fronts. These things will happen. You will have poppy droppy kind of conditions in the landing field. And we do get a number of accidents from these pop and drop conditions. It's not like people can exactly pinpoint it. They just say, I had a bad landing. But if we ask them, when was the landing? Okay, and where were you flying? And what was the date? Then the date and the time of day tell the whole story. And they're the whole lesson. If you're a new pilot, flare timing and landing becomes so much more tricky if you are flying in these mature conditions. And so that's just +1 for flying in the first couple hours of the day and last couple hours of the day if you're a beginner. Perfect. Quick, every so often we'll run across, and we're about to finish up here, so and we'll have time for just a couple questions, but I'll share a couple of interesting notions with you that one of them is kind of new. This one is, many paraglider pilots are always traveling. It's the funnest thing to do. It's just what we do, especially in this day and age. There's just tons of travel. And by and large, people think that wherever they're from prepares them for flying wherever they're going. So, example, a person who learns and flies at the point of the mountain just thinks that they're amazing because they can handle so much wind, and because it's so edgy, and so we fly in so many potentially turbulent situations, and we have to fly with such precision, we just think we're ready for anything. But it turns out that if we have to do a forward launch in a scree field at 12,000 feet, we just don't have what it takes. People who do primarily forward launches are going to get schooled when they come and try to inflate in 15-mile-an-hour wind. It just happens. And people from Colorado think that they live in the lee side of the Rockies. They fly in thermals and turbulence all the time. They come out here. They sometimes, have a hard time. So it is true that wherever you go, you should be very sort of humble. And it is not true that the flying where you live prepares you for flying everywhere else in the world. We all do well to go and reduce our operating limitations when we end up flying in a new place, seek out local guidance, try to fly these new places in mild conditions, and just keep ourselves out of harm's way as a cornerstone. I'll leave you with one final notion here. I like this one quite a lot. I found it to be more and more true as time goes on. Many of you who are listening in today may have the experience that you haven't flown in a while. And it also can happen that you have this experience that you're not feeling it. And in fact, if you look around, you see people who are selling their gear here and there. I just don't fly that much anymore. And I'm going to argue that the reason why people don't feel the draw of going to fly is because they haven't been flying. And if you ever had the opportunity to just fly on a consistent basis, or if you ever had the opportunity to just fly a lot, you will notice that it makes you want to fly more. So the reason I mention it is because it does have an effect on your overall safety. It's a little bit like going to the gym too. People kind of know that about going to the gym and exercise, et cetera. The more you go, the more you want to go. The less you go, the harder it is to make yourself go. So my suggestion is for your flying safety, and just so that you end up in this deal for decades, and that's what we hope for you, that you just fly throughout your life, and that you have nothing but good stories. And it does happen, believe me. We know lots and lots of people who are doing it. And the trick is to just go out and do some simple flights, and to fly a bit and to fly kind of often, and you will notice that you enjoy it more and that you want to fly more. And don't let the fact that you haven't flown in a while make it so that you don't go flying. So with that, I'll just, I just want to say thank you so much to Anna Mack who set this up for us today. And then for sure, all the volunteers on the USHPA committees and the boards, there's so many of them you can't believe. They're also very passionate, and I'm just humbled to be one of them. And for sure, this webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to share it with your friends who are USHPA members, I think it is. And we're at 6:57. We have time for a couple more questions.
Okay, so let me go back here. We have, I think, like 7 or 8 questions that we hadn't gotten to. I'll try to pick the ones that might be quick to answer, and anything that is unanswered, know that we will kind of cover that and we'll send everything out with the recording. Let's see, what are the typical springtime accidents we see on the reports? Blowbacks, collapses, etc.
Yeah, I think they nailed it. Blowbacks, collapses, bad launches, and mistimed landing. So it's all +1 for spread your wings in some nice conditions, get a little success going. If it's been a while, get with an instructor, get somebody on radio with you, and see if you can do a little kiting before you go out and fly. Do some what we call run-in flares, you know, kiting in a flat field where you run to speed and then practice your flare motion. That motion's not there if you've been out for 6 or 8 months. You'll be late on it, you'll be mistimed, but you'll remember it all like riding a bike if you just go out and find a way to kite or even do some runs across a flat field.
And then what are the most common accidents for new students?
New students probably varies depending on the location, but the crux would be takeoff moments and landing moments. So on takeoff moments, less than committed, like driving forward through the risers is like a really important cornerstone. Feeling the equal pressure and nice connection with the glider. If a student has a strong drive, good launch posture, and a good connection with the brakes, then they will have no problem during the takeoff. If a student, the next thing is the landings. So if you're a new student and you're listening in and you're asking that question, then the favor you can do yourself is to try to land and do your first flights when there's a little breeze. It turns out that when there's a little breeze, good landing technique and not as good landing technique both work. When there's zero wind, especially if you're at high altitude, or if it also happens in strong wind, but then the landing can be a lot more technical and you have to do it just right. So my suggestion would be, be deliberate on the takeoff, go like you mean it, like there's no question. And then when it comes to landing, then try to choreograph it and try to hold out for moments when there's a breeze in the landing field. That'll help a lot. To answer the question, it's largely ankle sprains, sometimes tibia, fibia kind of thing, and that's all from shortcomings in those areas that I mentioned. Those are the most common things.
Okay, were there any hang gliding accident trends to report?
So as much as I was on all the calls for hang gliding, and as much as I have some notes regarding hang gliding, the hang gliding volunteer stepped down towards the end of the season. And I did not have the bandwidth to prep on this subject. For sure, I'm a hang glider, and I'm gonna try to pick up the slack until we find a new volunteer. But I just didn't have time to chase that down, and I thought it's gonna be hard enough to nail this, the paragliding side with any clarity. And so we have to save that for another time.
So if anybody knows someone who wants to volunteer to help with hang gliding. All right, I've got 2 questions, and then, like I said, we've got a couple of more lengthy ones that we can reply to after the webinar, but there's 2 questions that came in related to CIVs, if you want to take those.
Okay.
So one is for a first CIV clinic, what 2 or 3 maneuvers would be most beneficial to focus on to be a safer pilot?
So we have to default a little bit to the coaches, because they have a good idea what needs to be done, and they're going to give you basically a treatment that's going to be really good. So have faith in your coach is number one. Number two is they should have and they will have a number of lower intensity drills that can sometimes be really useful and that can really get you in the groove. So pulling on the stabilo line, learning how to tweak the A's, pushing the speed bar, pitch movement fore and aft, brake pumping as if to pump out a stuck tip or a tangle. Those are all things that are really good value. And if your coach doesn't, if you can go to your coach and just say to the coach, can you give me some low intensity drills that I can chase down that can get me prepped for the next things. And then as you move into it, then you can go for things like asymmetrics and frontals and smooth circles. They don't have to be high intensity. You don't need to ask for spirals. You can just say, hey, how about working on smooth exits and good control? And those are the things that can lend toward you having a good, safe, confidence-inspiring first SIV course, and that's kind of what we want.
And then kind of a little bit opposite side of the spectrum here. Many have the assumption that civs make you safe pilots and ready for anything. False confidence. Can you address this and the dangers that it may present in the mind of those taking them, especially for the first time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to be fair, I'm not a super current maneuvers coach, but I did a lot of years of coaching. So I kind of know how it goes. And what I would tell any group of participants is that there's a bit of a stigma / curse that goes with any maneuvers group of 7 or 10 people who are at a session. At least one of them will take the new information and the new knowledge and new skill and use it to go get themselves in trouble. And so it's really up to the individual to use the information and use it well. And so if you're asking the question, then you've distinguished yourself as somebody who has an eye for that subtlety. And so, you know, whoever's asking the question, you're off the hook. You're probably going to not be the 1 out of 10. But for the rest of you, just remember the best way to think of your SIV experiences is that it's just a window into what's possible and what might be needed. And the best way to think of it is you can't show up at an SIV course, one pilot, and leave a different pilot. It's no substitution for a well-worked progression. It's no substitution for time and experience. And so, yeah, it's just I don't know, some people saw the movie Men in Black where they do the wand and push the button and people forget what happened. It would kind of be okay if we did that at the end of the maneuvers courses, because really the good value is what your body learns, not so much what your brain learns. Your body learns to have a slightly lower blood pressure when things get exciting. Your body learns to have some correct responses to certain situations. You learn to be less stiff, but also a little quicker. These things happen. But that's a fantastic question and a big subject, and I'm happy to shed a little light on it. But really, you just need to lean on your SIV coach, and hopefully they're kind of person who's going to really just give you a nice, big philosophical earful on the subject.
All right, Chris, do you want to take any more? Or do you want to leave them and we can answer them and send them back out? We're at 7:05 right now.
Gotcha. Well, you know, we still have 100 people hanging on the line. It seems like it's pretty good value. So if there is one more question there, I'd be happy to take it. We can call good at that.
We've got a couple on, you know, landings and ditching. So let me go to those. All right. So if I'm crashing into a tree due to a controlled ditch, when do I throw my reserve?
Well, for sure, this is not an exact science. Okay. And so for sure, I can't give you perfect advice. There's any explanation of any subject, especially like this, is going to like have two distinctly different sides, and somewhere in the middle is like the balance. And so what I would say to you is, if you ever think you need the reserve, if you ever are having dramatic events happening and there's pendulum swings or the potential for them, then if you're over someplace that's good for a reserve landing, like a lot of trees, get it out sooner than later, because sometimes there's a delay getting it out. So if it is said in the business, if you're thinking that you might need to use your reserve, then you're probably late in throwing it. So that's what I would say to that. And then, yeah, one of the other bits of logic is that some trees, and you can ask the locals about how the trees are at supporting a paraglider pilot. And so there are places in the world where the trees don't support you well and you slide down toward the ground as you fall down through the trees. That's not so good. You would much rather end up hanging in a tree, because it's not guaranteed, like I said, but there's a really good likelihood that you're going to have no injuries. And so there are places where you do well to have that extra 30, 40 meters of fabric out there ready to catch a tree and keep you suspended in it. So it's a heck of a thing to talk about, but it's the nature of the business. And we're better off if you have some thoughts along those lines churning around than having none. And it's going to be up to the pilot to make a good choice based on their situation.
Okay, another one about landing in not so great situations. If one has to land in water without a life jacket, is it wise to unbuckle your harness, flare, and jump out a few feet above the water?
Well, we can't be the people to tell you to do that. For sure, this person is doing us a favor by suggesting this, and it does have its merits. And there are certain situations where that could be the most clever thing to do. I'll say a couple things. One, little kids sit in a swing, they're holding onto the chains, and they don't just fall out willy-nilly. They have no leg straps, no chest strap, nothing. So by being slightly unbuckled or unbuckled, there's not like an immediate likelihood that you just fall out. So that's good to know. Another thing that's good to know is that if you're in the water, experience shows that you can get roughly one of the buckles off. So if you really need to get out of your harness, like there's nobody coming to save you, like there's no boats on the water in the lake, then you need to treat this with more seriousness than the person who's in a SIV course and has a life jacket on and there's a boat coming. These are all good things to talk about, good things to know. Finally, water rescue people tell the story that people, maybe a rescue diver or something like that, a rescue swimmer, when they're in the helicopter, they can't tell how high they are. When they're over the water and it's like glassy, or when there's waves for that matter, it sort of doesn't matter. A person has a really hard time to tell how high they are above the water. And there have been people who jumped out of this or that, thought they weren't that high, and they were crazy high, and they died. So this is just one more reason why we can't advocate and just be here on this webinar telling you to jump out of your paragliding harness. We just can't do that. The best we can do is to provide you with information, and I would say keep asking around about that subject and see what you can do to think through some of the scenarios, realize that they're all different. On one end of the spectrum, middle of winter, frozen lake, extremely cold lake or cold ocean, and there's no boats around to come and get you, you have a much different scenario than someone who's landing in waist deep water that's warm, and there's a bunch of people on the beach and they're all going to come help you, and the water's not moving. There's everything in between. So it really depends on the situation.
Okay, let's
Very
see.
good.
We've got one. We have a couple more. Are you going to take a couple more?
Sure. If we're liking this, I'm happy to do it. We still have 94 people.
I was going to say we still have quite a few people, so might as well press on and get them taken care of, and then we can wrap up here in the next 5 minutes or so. So,
sounds great.
What about the safety of pilot-driven tow winches? Are the current generation safe? Have there been any reported accidents with them?
So I think that when we authored the most recent iteration of the tow program, we didn't make any considerations for self-towing. And I think that's what the person's asking about. There's like a towing modality where you have a remote control in your hand and you tow yourself up. And so I will say that personally, I don't know. I do know of that happening. I know people doing that, and I don't know any bad stories yet. So that's the best that I can do on that subject. And I would also say the USHPA doesn't have a program or a protocol for that, and we haven't endorsed that as one of our modes yet.
Okay, and let's see, that one's no need. Okay, this one goes back earlier a bit, but it was a bigger question, so I just figured I'd leave it till the end. Is it true that reporting helps insurance in the big picture, as in stabilizing rates, making free flight seem less risky to insurers, and or even lowering rates for site insurance? If so, I think it can be an incentive to change the climate around reporting. Given that small clubs foot the bill for insuring a lot of local sites, it seems like an important topic.
I love that guy. That person knows the answer to that question. That's great. No, that person is spot on, and that's something we've been saying, for quite some time now. I didn't want to exactly sound like a broken record, but the person is exactly spot on. That when and I'll do my best here, and I'm not going to explain this perfectly, but when we became a self-insurance group, it was true that there was no history for self-insurance groups like us. And so they were lacking what in the industry is referred to as actuarial data. And basically how does our year or how does our behavior compare to historical data? So we're in the stage now where we're establishing the historical data. And the best way to establish historical data is to have lots and lots of these incident accident reports. And they can be totally to our benefit, because we could have a thick pile of them that's just bush landings with no injury. And from the insurance side, and when they're doing their calibration, that makes us look like a good risk. So please make the incident accident reports, and don't presume that someone else is going to do it. Just do it for us, and do it for the community, and hopefully, we really hope that multiple people are filing on the same incident accident. We can figure that out really easily on our end, and we can really, really use the incident accident reports.
Okay, I think we're good. There's a couple. There's like one that's specific just to you, Chris, so I'll send you that, and then I think we are good.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, gang. If you enjoyed this, then please let us know if you would like to hear specific subjects addressed. If you want to be a part of the process, then we're here for you. In the meantime, please just make us proud. Like, go out there and have an amazing spring and fly a lot, but stay out of harm's way. We really appreciate it. The statistical odds are that the early spring is usually pretty good. And so realize that your risk starts to come in a couple months into the flying season, basically. When you start to feel like, you're current, and you feel like things are going your way, and you're thinking that you might spread your wings and just make it your best year ever in terms of achievement. And we would like to talk you out of that just a little bit, and just encourage you to really go big, in the nice conditions. And then in the middle of the season, when it's just sun's high in the sky and everybody's going huge, then during that time, stand down just a little bit, save yourself for the September, October, et cetera, and see if you might just be able to, stay out of trouble. And then finally, remember that it's never the thing that you think is going to get you. We can't figure out what it is that's going to be the thing that ends up being a problem for any pilot. The best we can do is to keep our guard up. Remember, we're only as good as our very worst moment. So it doesn't do you any good to say you're conservative. It doesn't do you any good to be smart your whole flying career if you happen to screw up on any given day. So just make sure that everything's in order. If you have anything sneak into your world that's like illness, medication, sleep, emotion, these are all areas where if you have any of those things prevalent in your flying equation, then you fail the test and you shouldn't be flying. Thanks so much for tuning in. We really appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll look forward to hearing from you over the course of time. Cheers.